My name is Jennifer Turner, and I'm the director, as I think about half of you at least know, the director of the China Environment Forum here at the Woodrow Wilson Center. Half the room is newbies, so let me inform you that the Woodrow Wilson Center was created in 1968 by Congress as a memorial to Woodrow Wilson, President Wilson, who was both a policymaker and a scholar. And in his spirit, the 20-some projects and programs here at the center, which all focus on foreign policy issues, try to bring together government, NGO, business, and researchers in a kind of a nonpartisan, non-advocacy, and hopefully fun and exciting forum. We do this, the China Environment Forum, we do this like other projects in meetings, as well as, we have publications, grab them on the table, and increasingly we are our website is getting very dynamic, and I hope all of you go to it more often because we're posting research briefs, job postings for those of you that are looking for work. We're kind of busy here at the China Environment Forum. China's environmental problems, as most of you have probably noticed, has really been making the news over the last, particularly in the last year, but this project's been around for 11 years, and I've directed it for 9. My sidekick, Lyndon Ellis, for a year and a half, well, 2 years counting her internship with me before. We're kept quite busy. Today's it's there's our midsummer meeting, Midsummer Night Dream. We're having a meeting today, Midsummer Night Dream meeting, dreaming of green business in China. Now, as many of you know that follow China, that with smoggy skies, black water, and increasing health problems in China from pollution, that the Chinese government has over the past 5 years in particular, I think, become much more aggressive in their investment and amending laws, passing new regulations, becoming much more progressive in market mechanisms, information dissemination. But there's still a lot of weak links. We think the public participation, NGO component not as strong as it could be. And then also, most importantly, perhaps, is that local governments are very powerful. Powerful governments own businesses in China. No incentive for a lot of businesses to become clean and green. But, and how to kind of really get at that weak link. And I think that's why it was exciting to do this meeting today, because having people have Terry Yosie from the World Environment Center talking about his organization, his NGO's work on greening business, and often, and we're going to learn more, I will even learn more, working with international companies, but not just, but greening supply chains. An important link, creating incentives, but maybe more crucially, creating capacity. Then we also have, and you've got Terry's bio. He's been the president and CEO of World Environment Center since 2006, and he's held senior level positions in government, corporate, and consulting organizations focused on environment predominantly. Yes, he's a greenie. He's a green business guy. And next to him, and I have no bio, but she's a way cool person, Gwen Davidow, Director of Corporate Programs at World Environment Center, and she's also going to be helping field questions and comments in the Q&A portion. And now the super funny part is that Weijia is at WRI. He's the director of the New Ventures China program, and I got his bio, my friend Ray Chung sent it over, and there's bio, email. I didn't make the connection. I've known this man for years. I met him years ago. Actually, his wife, Li Lai Lai, was a speaker here. And he came over on vacation as she was speaking. But he is has 20 years experience, business experience working for American, Chinese, and European corporations. And I think he's also a greenie of sorts. But see, it was so funny. I walked into this morning, and I looked at him like, man, that guy, he looks so much like Li Lai's husband. And I walked up, I was like, it is Li Lai's husband, and he has a name, and his name is Weijia. So that's the new rule. He's his own man now. And he's going to talk to us about this. A few years ago, when New Ventures was first just dipping their toe into China, we had them come and talk, and it was more talking, in some ways maybe like the dream about what they could do in China in terms of creating green business, encouraging green business investment, and there's a little bit of a reality to that, schmaltzy sounding kind of dream type thing, but this is crucial, you guys. Greening business in China is not just greenwashing. That has a potential to make significant changes in the governance system in China, because again, a lot of businesses are owned by government. So I'm going to stop talking. The crowd's too big to pass the mic around to introduce yourselves. You guys have a list of the speakers, but we have plenty of government, NGO, business, and who knows in webland in the room. So I'd like to invite Terry to start us off. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jennifer, for that generous introduction, and more importantly, for the invitation to speak this morning. Before I get into the content of my presentation, let me start with a few general remarks. I think it's safe to say that any major organization that's involved in sustainable development these days is continuously re-examining how to make a bigger impact in the global marketplace with the development of international policy, and also continuing re-examination of how institutions can be designed and managed more effectively. I think that's particularly true in the organization that Gwen and I are affiliated with, the World Environment Center. We're a 34-year-old organization that has reinvented itself, and so that process of renewal, I think, challenges every one of us who is in this game, and I think no example could accentuate that point more than organizations that are involved in China. A second general observation I'd make is that when organizations work with business and work with their suppliers in emerging markets, I think, and I'll elaborate on this point further, but I think one of the critical factors of success is having an on-the-ground presence and capability. I don't think you can manage and achieve the level of progress that's needed around the world by running these things from the corporate office or from the agency headquarters. There's a real need for an on-the-ground presence that combines technical skills, economic and technological resources and know-how, etc. Also, I think it's traditionally been the case over many years that the assumption is that learning, technology, information diffusion will march along a pathway from west to east. I think it is increasingly the case that those pathways will go from east to west. And so I think one of those bellwether signals to keep watching for is to see how this interactivity across the boundary zones of nation states and regional and global markets accelerates that west to east, east to west kind of development. And then finally, I think that whether it's government, whether it's business, whether it's NGOs, universities, etc., we're all rethinking our organizations. You see that probably most directly in terms of the outsourcing of global businesses. I think that has a very direct impact on their scope and their ability to manage and assimilate resources effectively. But it's a never-ending prospect, and we'll see some examples of how it's playing out in our case. Let me just give you a very brief synopsis of what the World Environment Center is and what it does. We're a global nonprofit organization headquartered here in Washington. We're non-advocacy, and our job is to work with global companies to advance their business strategies and an operation to implement sustainable development, when we do that together with a lot of other groups as well. I think the key words here are non-advocacy. We don't do any lobbying. We don't take positions on public policy issues. It's fairly easy for us to work with a variety of groups in a very collaborative fashion, and at any single time we're working with government, business, the NGO community, universities, etc. Another key term here is business strategies and operation. What we're really trying to do through the World Environment Center is get inside a global company's thought process for how it conceptualizes its business strategy as related to sustainable development, and then implement that sustainable development business strategy through its business relationships and operations, not only in the Western countries, but particularly in the emerging markets across the supply chain, which are very global in nature these days. The third key word is partnership. We work with many, many different kinds of organizations. We're funded by many different kinds of organizations, and so that gives us a lot of flexibility in terms of developing specific initiatives and other programs. I just wanted to give you a very selective representation of who some of our members are. We currently have 46 global companies. That's up from 37 about 15 months ago. We have a target to get to about 70 companies by 2012. We're not on a path to try to become the biggest global sustainable development organization. What we want is to work with leading companies in their particular business sectors, and I think you would agree that these are some of the leaders in those business sectors. Over the last several years, the World Environment Center, or WEC as we call it, have a name without an acronym in this game. We've been involved in a series of projects in various parts of the world. We use the term capacity building to describe these projects, but what they're really about is the application of knowledge together with global companies to try to address particular business problems and devise solutions to those business problems. And so over the last several years, we've worked with Alcoa in Eastern Europe in the aluminum sector. We've worked with Dow Chemical and Johnson & Johnson in separate projects in Brazil. We've worked with Radisson Hotels and some beverage and food and sugar industry and coffee companies in El Salvador. We've worked together with the Nature Conservancy and the Rainforest Alliance to develop some programs for sustainable enterprise management to protect the Mayan rainforest in Belize and adjoining countries. And we're currently involved in a project funded by the Australian government to work with auto suppliers in Australia. And we have been very active in China over the last several years. And most of what I'll say this morning will focus on China. Taking stock of all of these activities over the last several years, what are some of the things we've learned? And this slide just represents what I would say is an organic distillation process of learnings. These will change over time. We continually have to update them to reflect new experiences. But here are just some ideas that we believe represent some critical factors for success. If you're going to work across the supply chain in countries like China, but also some other emerging markets, first, if you're going to work in this area, you really have to have the commitment from the senior leaders, not only of the global company, but also the leaders of the individual suppliers. If the leaders don't buy into this as something adding value to their own businesses, I think you're going to be finding, like Sisyphus, that the rock will roll back down on you. And so one of the things we ask for as a condition of suppliers participating is that we have a tangible demonstration of that leadership commitment. That could take the form of a written letter from the CEO or head manager of a supplier firm or something like that. Secondly, I can't emphasize this point enough. Another key factor to success is to have a direct on-the-ground capability to work with suppliers. Because what's involved here is training, technical support, mentoring, monitoring, assessment, site visits, a range of things that you're going to have some very strong personal interactivity in order to convey the value of these projects. And as one example of that, while we've been on the ground in China, it was only recently, in fact, just the other day, that we formally announced a new office for WEC in Shanghai. So we now have a permanent office there as opposed to just collaborative relationships. And our view was that we had to take that next step in formalizing our presence, which gives us another platform for added activity. I think there's some bad habits that have accumulated over the years in some Western companies who have been very large companies and have just assumed that they can mandate their suppliers to do certain things, or they can just say, audit this, audit that. And as a result, we've seen over the course of time the phenomenon of what's called audit fatigue. And some of these suppliers are actually large companies in their own right, and they're not only selling to one global company, they may be selling to several or even larger numbers. And so these suppliers themselves can have considerable market clout. And so in this east to west learning process I discussed earlier, I think it's increasingly the case that some of the suppliers in countries like China, India, other places, Brazil, have increased market muscle themselves, and so they're not going to be that receptive to working in a subordinate relationship necessarily with the global company. And so one of the things we continually ask ourselves is, what are the economic benefits to the suppliers for participating in these green supply chain projects? How does it strengthen their competitiveness? How does it improve their manufacturing processes or give them access to technology for doing so? How does it reduce their costs? And how do they forge closer business relationships? In other words, we're trying to make greening supply chain really a part of the normal business process, part of the transaction of adding value to customer-supplier relationships, but ultimately to their customers. Just as one example, there was an article in the press this week that indicate that there would be significant electricity shortfalls in China this year, with the result that there would be power disruptions to manufacturing facilities. Some of this has already started. I think as I look this in a green supply chain context, that's a pretty strong argument for an energy efficiency program in a manufacturing site for a supplier, because what it does is not only help maintain your business from being disrupted because of continual electricity reallocations, there's an argument here, and a strong one, that you can use energy efficiency to control your costs, because China is not exempt from the rest of the world in terms of having to absorb higher energy costs. We also look, as part of our learnings, for any external reinforcers or incentives for supplier performance, be they regulations and enforcement activity, NGO expectations, expanded transparency. This is a work in progress, obviously, in different markets. It's a work in progress in the Western world as well. But I think keep your eye on other incentives beyond just the economic that can drive supplier performance. I think any experience with suppliers in China and elsewhere would also come to a recognition that you're going to encounter a very wide variability in their capabilities. Some suppliers have management systems in place, some are ISO 14001 certified, some are just have the public relations official in charge of waste management. And so you're starting from highly variegated situations. And so one of the tasks here is to get people up to speed to a common baseline to move forward. And lastly, a learning is make sure that when you work in these countries, you work not as the imperialistic Westerner, but that you work with the local culture, the local face. You have an understanding of that. You're not the foreigner. You're the trusted advisor. You're the partner. You're contributing value to the process that you hopefully will obtain ultimate value from yourself. We have evolved over the course of time in China and elsewhere a methodology or an approach for how we actually take these nice sounding concepts like greening the supply chain into specific concrete actions. And I'm quickly going to lead you through some of these steps, which again we continually fine-tune based on our experiences from individual projects. I mentioned how important it is to have that leadership level participation and commitment from both the company, customer, and the supplier. We start that off by having the company specifically issue written invitations to that leadership and the key staff to participate in these green projects. So there's a signal from the customer, from the marketplace, that this is important. We want you to be part of this. After there's an agreement to participate, we then organize a kickoff event where the leadership level buys into this, peer-to-peer, across the table like this. And so you get that face-to-face participation and commitment. And then that is immediately followed by some training for the working staffs, not the CEOs, but for the working staffs, in order to ensure what their level of understanding is and to begin that process. Depending on the size of this enterprise, because some of these projects can involve 40 suppliers, there are projects with several hundred suppliers, and so your ability to visit every site or talk to everybody on a one-on-one basis all the time may be constrained by the size, and so you have to revert to web-based materials, web-based training, things of that nature. We want each supplier to form a core staff team because there has to be accountability for performance in these projects. We go through a process whereby at the very beginning there is an initial self-assessment done, so we know where the supplier starts from. How much information, how much technical assistance, training to calibrate and to devote to this supplier versus that supplier. That's what you can achieve with a direct on-the-ground approach. We then ask the suppliers to commit to identifying specific project scopes and goals. That may differ. One supplier may be more concerned with water quality, another energy efficiency. Some suppliers may have several goals, others may just have one. But we go through a process after this initial baseline assessment of asking them to commit to specific goals and specific time frames. And so what you get from that is an ability then to collect, analyze data, convert that into specific action steps, timetables, and then track the results throughout the body of the project. We do site visits, and again, those may vary depending on the complexity of the issues and the need of the individual supplier. We also, in about the middle of the project, do a midterm assessment. This would consist of a workshop where the suppliers would individually comment and discuss where they are in relationship to their project goals. So this is constructed as part of a learning process within the supplier community as well as between the suppliers and the global customer. And as you go through this midterm supplier process, obviously there are going to be some adjustments made. Some of the goals may not have been realistic. So what's a more realistic outcome? Some of the goals can be achieved sooner than you thought. Maybe we can achieve a higher goal then. Toward the back end of the process, we do include an audit in the approach that we take. However, this is not a just pass the audit exam. I think there's a lot of flaws in the thinking that the goal of supply chain management here is just to pass the audit. We all know from taking tests ourselves that you can study to try to pass the test, but you haven't really incorporated all of the learnings and capabilities that you will need in order to be effective on a continuous basis. Audits play a useful role, but that's not the sum total of the goal here. The goal is to improve performance and add value, and audits are just one measure of that. We do then summarize the results of individual projects. Each supplier will submit a final report. There will be customer feedback on whether on those results. The customer in the global company will use that as a basis to determine whether to continue a business relationship with a supplier. And I think that's a powerful signal to send. And then we have a final workshop to compare results, celebrate successes, and compare learnings across suppliers in the global company, and then we have a mechanism for follow-up. This is difficult to read. The title of my presentation is Greening the Supply Chain in China and Other Regions. This is a slide pertaining to other regions. What it really just represents is we have had some activities underway in El Salvador for the last several years, and this is just a summary slide, and this presentation will be on our website, so you'll have access to it. But it's just a summary of some small medium-sized enterprises and the aggregated results that they achieved across a variety of performance indicators dealing with environmental quality conditions, water consumption, gasoline savings, CO2 emissions, etc. We have an ability to roll up the results of individual supplier participation into outcomes like this, but also the individual suppliers know the results, but this can enable them to do some benchmarking themselves. We not only have activities and offices in China, but we have an office in El Salvador and also one in Germany. We are particularly committed to finding local partners for all the work that we do. So when we did a project in Romania, for example, we had faculty from some of the Romanian universities involved. We have that in China. We have that in terms of other projects that we do around the world. It's very important to be able to access that technical infrastructure. Similarly, we use retired industry executives. There's a wealth of understanding and knowledge from people in global companies who have retired. They're still very interested in being active, and maybe they don't charge so much because because their spouses don't want them around the house too much. And I think part of our focus, part of our niche is knowing how to bring all these talent pools together in ways that are applied to solving problems, together with networking it through other organizations, be it the Asian Development Bank, the World Bank, NGO community, etc. Finally, what's the value here to global companies? I've talked about the value to suppliers in terms of economic competitiveness, cost reduction. The value to global companies, it seems to me, there's several sources of value. One is by working with an organization like the World Environment Center, a global company can help solve its own business problems. I cannot stress enough how few people, some of these global, very big global companies with market caps in the tens of billions of dollars, how few people these companies have in some of these major American markets to work these kinds of issues. And so I think one of the advantages that we have is we know how to put together that package of expertise that's business relevant to applying sustainable development in real terms. And so that direct on-the-ground approach actually fills a gap that exists in many global companies. I think another value to companies is they're not just operating in China, they're operating in many other regions of the world, and so there's an ability we have to translate learnings and knowledge back to the global company. So we're acquiring this knowledge in the East, we can transfer it back to the West. So it's that continual transmission of information. And then finally, I think we operate very cost effectively. We're not competing with consulting firms because I don't think they have the same business model and same kind of expertise and access to expertise that we do. But we do try to make this. We're a nonprofit, and so we're not in this to pay back money to shareholders. We're in this to try to solve problems and make the world a better place. So with that, let me stop. I'd be happy to, in the Q&A session, take any questions you have, and Gwen will probably carry the bulk of the knowledge in addressing that. The presentation will be up on our website if those of you who have interest in it.
One thing I wanted to ask is that I don't know if you want to do it now or the Q&A, but I think that I was wondering if you might be able to, maybe if you could talk, if it's a couple minutes to do it now or right at the beginning of the Q&A about some of the experience you've had working with in Shanghai with you, because you've worked with GM in working with the suppliers. Do you want to say a few things? Say a couple things about that now.
All right.
Because I think that, but I think it was really, I wanted him to talk about actually what they do, because part of what the China Environment Forum, what we aspire to, is to kind of lessons learned, and this is a different kind of model. There are not very many NGOs working in China on greening business. His wife was doing that stuff before a little bit, but that was a Chinese NGO, very small. But can you say a few things on that?
I'll say
That
a
would
few
be
things,
very
and then
helpful.
if people have interest in it during the Q&A, we can.
And then we could go in more depth.
Several years ago, General Motors Corporation, which, for those of you following, the company has been rapidly developing manufacturing capacity in China. Several years ago, GM, which is a member of the World Environment Center, came to us at that time looking to learn more about greening its supply chain. And so there was a demonstration project that involved, I think, about 8 companies, mostly Chinese, in its supply chain. And from that initial demonstration project that took place in the, I think, 2006-2007 timeframe, there were some learnings and benefits, both to the suppliers and to GM. This was funded by GM. Subsequent to that, GM's business strategy has continued to evolve in China, and so it has partnered with a Chinese manufacturer called the Shanghai Automotive International Corporation, SAIC. They have a joint venture partner called Shanghai General Motors. We are currently working, we started a project with Shanghai General Motors in January of this year with 40 of what's called SGM, so suppliers. And so the process that I outlined in my presentation, we're applying that kind of process to 40 suppliers of Shanghai General Motors. And so we're in there individually working one-on-one with individual suppliers and encountering all the dynamics that I mentioned in my talk. It's our expectation that a lot of the suppliers are going to be able to quantify the specific economic and other performance benefits as a result of participating in this project. We've been very pleased at the level, not only of the initial CEO level commitment, but the follow-through from the individual suppliers. I think what that tells us is they see value in this. And they don't see value because it's the World Environment Center. We're merely the convener and catalyst of the process. But to the extent that you can get individual projects like this focused on creating value, then I think what you do is really make sustainability more sustainable. And so that's our philosophy, that's the approach we've taken. We're in conversation right now with some other global companies about additional projects in China and some other parts of the world. So we think this business value argument is really part and parcel of what sustainable development is all about.
I like that. That was like a great bite-sized nugget. And you're hungry still, though, right? Mm-hmm. So keep that hunger in mind, because in the Q&A, you can just go to town on Terry and Gwen asking them questions. But now, I'd like to shift the focus to look at what New Ventures WRI is doing in China, their own greening business of sorts. Why don't you take this one? Do you want to do musical chairs real quick? Can you guys swap?
Yeah, sure.
Well, I actually, there's a seat.
Oh, no, wait, that's right. I'm so low tech. There's actually a little
you can use this too.
remote.
Either way.
Or actually, there's a remote there. Oh, yeah, it's set up, and then you can sit back here with your remote. What? You want me to use this one? Oh, he's just putting up his PowerPoint, and then he'll come back here, I think, because he can use the remote. Oh, you need to sit there?
Yeah.
Okay. Actually, Terry, can you swap, because
Yep.
you need to speak into the mic.
Yep, I'll move.
That way you can because we're webcast, so we need to.
Good morning, everyone. I appreciate Jennifer give us this opportunity to talk about our program. And just like Jennifer said, we knew each other
But
for
didn't
quite
know that we knew each other.
some years. Actually, even I was in this room in year 2003. But before that, you had involved in the I forgot it's river project,
Yeah.
right? You were so angry somehow about the river things, working together with a lot of NGOs. Remember that?
I am never angry, no.
I'm kidding. Just very excited and very energetic working with all kind of NGOs.
But not angry.
Sorry. Actually, I should also a little bit talking about the New Venture program itself. The program that covers so far 5 countries in the world, and it is a WRI's program, started 4 or 5 years ago. Right now, the program has India, China, Brazil, Indonesia, and Mexico, and very actually already start Colombia, and also thinking about to open offices in countries in Philippines and South Africa. So the program, the New Venture program, is growing, and the reason that I'm here is because we have the country meeting in WRI, and after several years, we're independently, separately running this program, even though there's WRI on top of it, try to coordinating, but country to country is not talk to each other yet. So now we are thinking more how to utilize the synergies, the collective powers to make this program really become a global program, a New Venture program. In this conversation and talk to you, that because time is limited, I'm not going to go to the details about what we're doing daily, what kind of operations, what kind of the small, medium-sized companies that we're working with. So I will just now for the talking just give you a general picture of what we're doing and what the problems that SMEs, meaning small and medium-sized enterprises, are running into in their business, and particularly the green or sustainable types of business of SMEs are having problems, what they are, and how, in general, we try to help them. So that's basically, I would just, brief you today. First of all, small and medium-sized enterprise in China has a definition that in U.S. there's no medium-sized, just directly from small to large. And but in the many other countries that has a category called the small and medium-sized companies, and countries like in China, they are in the provincial levels. They are government bureaus who is admin the SME activities. So by definition, there's official Chinese government definition, which goes to 2 very confusing, I would say, categories. One is the size of the revenue. The other one is the number of employees. Because you could have SMEs that is a large number, but since it's labor intensive, it has less revenue. At the same time, you could have high revenue companies, which is high tech, but less number of employees. So this definition is really very accurate. But from the government point of view, that here's the definition. In the company, that the total employee number beyond 1,200 and or the total annual revenue beyond or go below, 100 million, 120 million, or 130 million RMB. That would be considered small SMEs. But in the reality, that besides these two category or definition about SME, the real feature, the more important thing to look at SME is the ownership, particularly in the recent years, that the ownership really is differentiate the smaller companies from larger ones. In the case of the Chinese situation, almost 100% SMEs are privately owned. So the general picture of SMEs in China looks like this. Number one, first of all, majority of the SMEs are privately owned companies. It has a meaning about why the privately owned I want to emphasize, because there's the counterpart of the business in China that either large, huge, super huge state-owned companies or large, very, very large multinational-owned companies or consolidated, reasonable-sized companies. And the rest, the majority, is SMEs. So this is the group of the companies that we are working with, serving with. Second, in China, as probably in many other countries, SMEs is the most active part of our economy. Quantitatively, 60% of the GDP generated from SME. 85% of the employees came from SME. So SME really is, the main force of the economy in China. Also, SME is the fastest growing economic force. It's on a daily basis. If you go to China, any country, any city's business registration bureau, it's always in line because there's so many people registering companies. The number of the companies given birth each day is over 10,000. Because nationwide, it's more than that. Okay, it's over 10,000 every day. But it doesn't mean that it can survive that long. And also, that most of the SMEs in China are in the coastal areas. In the inland of China, western part, remote areas, SMEs are not as active as in the coastal areas. And in that areas tend to be more state-owned companies. And also, just like I said, Chinese SMEs has much shorter life in comparison with, for example, the US SMEs. And there are reasons. But there's lack of statistics to explore why the Chinese SMEs, I believe there are reasons why their life is, cycle is short. Normally, in 2 years ago, the statistics says that the average life of Chinese SMEs, excluding macro-size SMEs, which is mom and pop size of one person, two people, that kind of is considered macro enterprise. I'm talking about small and medium-sized SMEs in China. The average life cycle is 2.5 years. But in the U.S., it's about 5 to 7 years. So shorter life cycle. I think because it's still the Chinese economy is adapting to market economy. So that gives a longer learning curve for people who want to involve in business. And it's not surprisingly, the social discrimination about or on SME very high. And I will come to this part when I talk about a little bit about the human resource. Is one of the very, very challenging problem to SMEs. Government, last point is government. Government really, because from the economic point of view, government really supporting a lot of lip service, the growing of the SMEs. And it's more on a sympathize instead of a substantial support because still there are over hundreds large huge state-owned companies that belong to the government. Therefore, when you allocate the resources, the governments of course have to give the priority to the large state-owned companies. And however, there are funds available to SMEs, which is not as big as, for example, in the U.S., because U.S. you have the small enterprise bureau, something like that.
Small business administration.
Yeah, small business administration. Yeah, and I know there's pretty decent startup monies available, seed monies available to small business. In China too, except if you are very high-tech oriented companies, you would be able possibly get a grant or money from government. Otherwise, it's not possible. Okay, so now it's come to our part, sustainable firm. And there's so many, I don't want to go into the details about the definition of sustainable development because there's many. And I follow what the United Nations definition stated in 1887. And from that part, because we are doing business, we're involving industries. So we are concentrated our scope of definition or concepts within the industry. In that way, that it's easy for us to, or easy for people to understand sustainability. What we're doing right now, we see that the sustainable development of business or industrial business in China, we think there are 2 stages. One stage is right now we are experiencing, is creating, involving, emerging new SMEs which are green, small, new, of course. Then the second stage would be that we're going to revisit the existing companies whether it's small, medium-sized companies or even large companies, they are not green yet. So there will be a work to retrofit the existing business which are not green yet. In these two stages, we're right now as in the first stage, which is helping the new business to grow, to come out. And for that part, there's also 3 different stages, and I like to use, because I came from industry, so I like to use a production term to categorize what stage right now is. In the normal industrial production, in the maintenance business, it went through reactive maintenance to preventive maintenance to predictive maintenance. For sustainable business, the same thing. Right now, we are in fixing the problem stage. So most of the SMEs the new SMEs, green SMEs, they are fixing the existing problems. They look into the opportunity. They look into the problems as their opportunity, whether it's a new technology or whether it's some kind of a new business model or new business opportunities. What they're looking into is the existing problems. A very typical example would be in China, the energy conservation industry. I did a study. The China energy conservation industry is the fastest growing industry in the whole world. Reason is very simple, because China's industry in general has very low energy efficiency. So it's demanding for higher efficiency. Therefore, a lot of SMEs jumped into this business. That's what we are in the stage, reactive types of solving the problem, dealing with the SMEs, dealing with the existing problem, look into them as opportunity. And I also want to a little bit cover why do sustainable SMEs matter in China, which is common sense. Number one, China become the world manufacturing center. And believe me, when I was working in industry several years ago, all the Chinese people were so happy that China become the world manufacturing center. And so I don't know where this term came from, but excited, people become excited. Gradually, now it changed. People realize that this center bears too much obligations, problems, and mostly pollutions. Government realize, private sectors realize, and but before, several years ago, it was not the case. People are so happy. The second reason that sustainable SMEs really make sense in China is because industries as a whole in China have much lower efficiencies in comparison with developed countries. For example, with US, with Germany, with Japan, in certain important resource-oriented efficiencies, China is very, very low still. Energy, for example, energy consumption in China is, US is not that good as Japan, okay? So I almost try to say US is good, but Japan, use example. The Chinese energy consumption average is double of what the Japanese industry is doing, almost. So there are so many opportunities that the industry can improve itself. Next one. China is, I guess, is the only country in the world that the energy concentrated on coal. We have, so far, the government statistics say 65% of the energy, primary energy, comes from coal. But in reality, probably higher than this number. And also, China facing extremely challenge in water, shortage, pollution. The depleting resources in China is also a well-known sign. 5 years ago, you would hardly hear that China buying large volume of iron ore from Australia, from Brazil, but now is China the largest buyer in the world. Because the reason is because China no longer has these types of resource. At the same time, China is the world manufacturing center. So it's keep the momentum, keep the production there. They have to import. So resources are really, really crisis in China, in general. Next one, for developing country, not only, okay, so a coal or, this related to the mitigation of emission, CO2 emission. But for developing countries, adaptation to climate change is equally important, which normally developed countries are, tend not to consider that much. But right now, it's gradually become very, very hot topic as negotiation power, whatever, between the developing countries versus developed countries. Adaptation, but adaptation, it is very important. Adaptation means the Chinese has to face shortage of water. The Chinese has to face shortage of all kind of resources. Chinese has to face very, very bad weathers in the future, near future. Changing the development pattern in China has become a fashion. From the government statement, central to local become a very, very important slogan. Yesterday, when I talked to my colleagues about two terms, which is used in the Chinese government, central government document. One is the development, one is the growth. Almost in the central government documents, especially recent document, the growth, the term of growth, gradually phased out. It changed to development, because it's fortunately there are very clearly defined terms also in China, in Chinese, growth versus development. I think to some extent that the Chinese government is adapting to or learned from the not only the mainstream of the economics, but also learn from the new thought on the economic development, which mostly come from the eco-economics and environment economics. In that kind of economics theories, development term is quite different from growth. Challenges facing Chinese SMEs. So it has two categories. One is in general, which is all the SMEs facing the problems, the challenges. And then the second comes to particularly the sustainable development SMEs are facing. which means that not only they have the similar problems or exact the same problems as SMEs, they also have some very unique problems or challenges they face. Human resources is one very, very obvious problem that facing Chinese SMEs. If you look at how the young people want to work as a, go with the ranking system, number one, they want to work with the government agent because it's very secured, much better social welfare system coverage. And for one position, government position available, you could end up with over thousands young kids to compete because it's a very secure job. The second tier would be the huge state-owned companies and foreign-owned companies, because the salary is much, much higher in China, in the super large state-owned companies and foreign-owned companies are almost maybe 10 times, 20 times, 30 times, I'm talking about average, higher in salary versus the rest. And there are many other layers down the road. SME is the last to consider as a job for young people. My age, I'm okay. I love to work with SMEs, but for young kids, they don't want to. They want to work with large firms, and they're very practical because salary-wise, it just you make less. And NGOs facing the same problem in China. It's like SMEs. You cannot offer, attractive income to the SMEs, to the talent people. SMEs also facing, this is typical in developing countries, a very weak governance, because most of SMEs start as a family business. When they grow, they have to break the rule to have becoming institutionalized. So governance is constantly issue that SMEs has the challenging problem. They have to cross over this governance problem, otherwise they cannot grow. Social capital also very poor. Therefore, SMEs has the least credibility among all kind of entities in China. Actually, I think that is, US may be better, because when I start working, I used to work in SME US, a small company in US too. But I think I got, some government support, the SME got some government support, okay. Banking system, very discriminative to SMEs. Give you example. In the US, if the bank lend loans to companies, they almost no differences between large firm and a small firm in terms of interest rate. In developing countries, for example in China, if the market interest rate for bank system to let loan, let's say right now it's 8%, but if they lend to SMEs, the interest rate become 11%. That 3% is the risk covered. And the largest Chinese bank, a number of employees is 10 times larger than Citibank, for example. I don't give the name of the Chinese bank. Even so, they said they are lack of manpower to deal with SMEs because the transaction cost is high. which is normally the case. It's very understandable because whenever you loan a company, you have to go through all the due diligence process, and you rather want to make bigger companies instead of working with smaller companies. And the information system in China, the credit rating system in China, yet to be developed, or it's not there, strong yet. So it is the reality. So come to the challenges facing Chinese sustainable SMEs. Number one, it is a term still very confusing or less heard among the Chinese business people about sustainable business in China. Large firms, yes, they are, much more informed. But small firms, people in general, is still partially alien term, sustainable development. Therefore, it would be hard to say that, in the recent future, the Chinese SME, sustainable SMEs, could become a mainstream business. Not there yet. If you are not mainstream business, it means you have a lack of resource supporting policy, preferred policy, all kind of lack in resource. Secondly, from the consumer point of view, when they choose products made from a sustainable, green, clean SME, the other one made from regular SME or regular business, the choice is more on the ethical. If they buy sustainable, if they buy the product from sustainable SME, green SME, because, for example, recycled paper, organic fertilizer, okay. Not only they are more expensive, which is normally the case, but also they're not, not in the mainstream, and people tend to go with the conventional products. For Chinese, we know that if you go to China, you probably would notice we have several traditional festivals. During the festival, for example, the Moon Festival, okay, so you have the moon cake itself right now, cheaper than the package, okay. But then the SME said, okay, I want to, the green SME said, I want to make
green mooncakes?
Yeah, no, the green package, all right? Less package, don't waste paper. Consumers don't buy it. Consumers spend the stupid money to buy the package instead of buy the mooncake. So it's still there. Therefore, it's ethical choice versus economic choices. Still the case. From the investment point of view, whether that is a banking system or venture capital, okay, equity investment, policy support versus market economy is still a very important factor, which if you consider it from the investment community point of view, it is a risk, because if the business is supported by policy instead of market support, they consider, today you have the policy support, what about tomorrow? If the policy disappeared, then you don't have the business. So that is still a problem in China for the sustainable SMEs. They got policy support, same time they become policy risk. Of course, public awareness is also a very important part to supporting the business, but it's yet to, to be largely aware. Supply chain, material flows, also very important. Let me give you a very quick example. Biomass industry in China. China every year has three traditional way, very inefficient way, but there are technology to package it, to process it, to produce it pellet. However, you need to have a new supply chain to make it work. Otherwise, it's not compatible in versus, for example, conventional fuel like coal. Okay, now it's running the competition very, very severe. The biomass guys, majority of them are SMEs, but their technology, their production system, their logistics system are not there yet. So that the competing pricing in the market, they're high. And then energy efficiency, the heat content are lower than coal. So that is an example to demonstrate that for sustainable business to grow, you need to develop a big part. You need to develop a totally brand new supply chain system.
And then we'll have time for Q&A. Do you have a couple more slides?
All right.
Quick? Okay.
I talked over it.
Yeah, just
Okay.
overview, and I think that.
Okay, all right. So this is a common stuff. Okay, so I want to
I know what you guys do.
Okay, what we're doing. Okay, basically we do three things: supporting sustainable SME development, promoting sustainable SME business, and helping China grow future business stars. In the supporting, we have capacity building, customized business consulting, and bridge gap between SME and investor. And it's our daily job. That's what we're doing every day. Also, we have the promoting sustainable SME business. Our colleagues back to DC, we're doing case studies. We also want to involve more. We have information dissemination through media to inform public, policy and industry specs, dialogue with the government, with the industrial association, help China grow future business stars. We want to lead the investment trend. Also, we want to grow tomorrow's business leaders, which is the sustainable business. I'm done.
Oh. Well, okay, but now I'm going to, this is a deja vu thing. I wonder if you could just can you give, just like he did, a brief example of, one of these things that you do, like a certain business, SME that you guys have helped usher in? Either you or Ray can maybe just to get our...
one concrete example?
One concrete example of a company that what's one of your green stars that you've helped usher out?
Okay, I'll give you an example. We are working with a company who is working in the desert. And this company has been in the desert for over 10 years. And they found one particular bush in the desert that has, if it extract the material from that plant, it can be used for organic pesticide.
Oh.
And organic pesticide in China is worldwide. Pesticide, as you know, that is a big business. But organic pesticide is 1/10 of in U.S. is 1/10 of the overall business. In China is maybe nothing there yet. So we helping this company by getting to the desert, look into their business, because when they try to grow the bush, we talk to them, see whether it is ecologically it makes sense. We offer them experts in the ecology that study whether their business model is sustainable, and we of course engage them with investors. Right now, I engage with them a third round of conversations, discussions, meetings with the investors, and the business grow. Their business grow.
Okay. Well, I think, and during the Q&A, I think we're going to want to hear more examples of types of. I mean, maybe, Ray Chung here. He's a guy in the background in the DC office, moving to Beijing to be working more on this project with Weijia. Okay, I'm gonna first of all, can we applaud these guys? And because we are webcast, Jing Chun or Ma Tianjie, we have another microphone. We have interns. Jing Chun, come grab a microphone, and please raise your hand, and we'll pass it along this way. And make sure you ask your question in the microphone. And we got almost an hour to do questions, and I will intervene when I want to because I am the chair. Okay? I love the power of this job. Okay, raise your hand so we can point to you and questions. Helen, right there. And please say your name and affiliation when you ask a question. Click it on the bottom. It's on. It is the switch on the very bottom. On the bottom. There we go.
Okay. Is it on now? Yes. I'm Helen Raffel, Resources for the Future. And I was going to ask the same question Jennifer just asked, but now I'd like the WEC people to give us a very concrete, specific example of how you helped, say, a Chinese firm, if you've done that yet, or else in some other country, to improve its efficiency, like energy efficiency or whatever you think is a good showcase example, but extremely concrete in detail what you did.
And concise. We want it all.
We're going to tag team the response to this, but I think a good example that I would cite actually was not in China, but it was in Romania. Romania, newly ascended to the European Union, has a lot of older industrial infrastructure. The American-based company Alcoa has had a joint venture in Romania, a firm called Alcoa Fujikura that makes aluminum products that are ingredients into automobiles. The U.S. Agency for International Development funded the World Environment Center over the past couple of years to work with Alcoa Fujikura's plants in Romania. The metrics we were looking at improving included particularly energy efficiency, because aluminum production is a highly energy-intensive process, as you know. There were also some goals related to water consumption and reducing that. We managed this project out of our office that's located in Germany. We have a partnership with the University of Augsburg, and so we're able to call upon some of the faculty from that university, and in addition, a WEC staff person manage that process. But then we combine that with a direct on-the-ground support to recruit Romanian scientists, engineers to work very directly with the plant. The outcome was to yield very measurable, very specific cost reductions in terms of energy costs, but also to look at a range of things such as heating and lighting, other kinds of technologies that could be substituted. I mean, we're dealing with very old Soviet-era technology here, and so there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, not only in Romania, but I think in many, many emerging markets. So it's not necessarily rocket science to be able to go in and very quickly bring in management techniques and off-the-shelf technologies that can be repaid in fairly short order. But let me stop there and invite Gwen to jump into this dialogue.
Okay, thanks. Helen, thanks for the question. I can give you some very specific examples of the successes we had in the initial GM China project, where we worked with 8 of GM's top-tier suppliers, and we were able to, in over a year, about 14-month period, through these 8 suppliers, save over 2,000 tons of CO2 emissions, also over 65 million gallons of water, and net savings economically. This is taking into account the investments that were made as well for some of the new equipment that we recommended they buy, was over $250,000. In a sense, those numbers for China aren't huge. Keeping in mind these are just 8 suppliers. But if you take into account what we want to do is increase the project by having these top-tier suppliers then go to their suppliers. And it's like that old shampoo commercial, and then I told 2 people and they told 2 people and so on and so on. And it's a viral project. And so the continuous improvement for those 8 suppliers still yields these savings. And in addition to that, these suppliers then pass on this knowledge with the economic incentives to their suppliers.
Just one other postscript comment. Can't hear you.
Turn it on. Can you, Jane, we'll just leave the mic on so we don't.
I just want to ask a little bit more detailed follow-up. You talked about Alcoa and GM. They presumably have enough funds to capitalize their own improvements and look for the long-term results. I guess you don't work with any of the smaller firms, smaller, medium-sized, that would need outside support. And also, since you are looking back into the suppliers, are they also larger firms or are they small firms? And how do they get their funds? Do they get it from the final buyer, Alcoa or GM? I mean, what's the process for expanding this beyond just encouraging improved profits for the big firms?
A couple of comments of it. One is, it is unrealistic and do not expect that global companies are going to subsidize their suppliers. This is an economic process at work here. Secondly, we have identified, particularly, we're working with a supply chain of a range of different sized firms. One of GM's suppliers in China is BASF, big company. But there are many other smaller suppliers involved in the supply chains of these companies. One of the constraints that some of these suppliers will in fact experience is that in the process of identifying very substantial opportunities to reduce water consumption, energy consumption, is the initial capitalization of those improvements. And so we are engaged in a dialogue now with some of the multilateral institutions in different parts of the world, which are turning increasingly to the idea of creating loan capabilities or other kinds of financing instruments targeted at the SME sector in places like China and India. And so one of our strategic thought processes going forward is, how do we match up what we're able to identify across the supply chain of particularly these smaller firms who do not have funds of capital to invest, really? How do we match those needs up against the interest of the multilateral sector and create that kind of synergy? So I think we're asking ourselves, how do we make that happen? But we've been engaged in that conversation now with some of the multilateral organizations. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there to do something very tangible. And you do need to spread the word and all of that, but this is about money too. So we want to bring that into bear. One last comment. We do have a report on our Romanian project. If you have any interest, I can get you a copy of that.
I actually think I want to ask the new venture folks to jump in, because I think what you guys are trying to do is also to answer Helen's question and your dilemma that, because I like the idea that you guys are trying to catalyze it going down the supply side, but there is the issue of capacity, and maybe you or Ray, I think it'd be interesting to hear a couple more examples of, I like the Bush one. Are there examples of anyone you're working with who is a supplier of multinational companies, or is it still, or is it, or maybe it's further down the line?
Yeah, we not in the. Okay, give you an example. It's the organic food, right?
Yeah.
So organic food, we have in our companies we have the firm called Organic Farm, which is the best Chinese organic food label logo in China, and they have successfully entered into supermarket like Walmart. I forgot all the big ones.
Carrefour, probably. Yeah.
And last year, they did they did a study together working with our colleagues through by the Georgetown University students. They asking the Georgetown MBA students to help them study how in the U.S. the organic farms work with guys like Walmart or big supermarket retailers. And I think that was very, very good learning process. And from there they took the lessons and go back renegotiate with the big firms. It was a real case.
Actually, one other quick question, and I'll open up again. How many companies is New Ventures working with in China? How many of your little?
Yeah, past that. Okay.
Your babies.
Yeah. It depends on which, what kind of service we give. In general service, we have several hundred, but for the financial types of help, engagement with it's about over 50 some.
Over 50. Okay.
But it's not everyone worked yet.
Yeah. No, but but again, I think it's significant to note that, to my knowledge, New Ventures is the only NGO that I know doing this kind of work with the bottom up. Okay, let's open up for some more questions. Raise your hands high so my intern can see you. Ma Tiente, give it to this gentleman and then to this gentleman.
Hi, Andrew Kolb with Conservation International. I was fascinated to learn about the discrepancy between what an SME can expect from a Chinese bank and what a larger company can. And I'm curious as to what other sources of capital there are for an SME, or are there none?
None.
That answers that.
And then right up here. And then Gary. Gary, you had a question too. Thanks.
Hi, Andrew Shineson, CECC. Thank you all for coming to speak today. When I told my coworker that I was going to see this, immediately the first thing he said was, ask him about Xinjiang. He said that apparently there in a lot of inland provinces that there are openings for things like businesses like ecotourism and various other things, like you're talking about projects in the desert. And I was just wondering what perspectives you had on development in places that need a lot of development, like Xinjiang and other inland provinces in China.
So trying to promote industry in Xinjiang and
sustainable.
西方打开，绿色的打开。
Yeah. Ecotourist is not in good business yet in China. We are dreaming to develop this kind of stuff in China, but we need methodology, we need support, because most of the tourist spots in China are not good yet. But in Xinjiang, we do have SME, which is in the paper mill, unfortunately, very polluting things. But they are fixing the problem, and they are in a very sensitive lake area. That wintertime, the swamp, what do you call when the wintertime they go from the north to south. Migration process. They have to stop in that lake, but the lake is surrounded by paper mill plants, and that company it's really working hard to clean up the lake.
And you're helping them get the technology and.
We're helping them get better name nationwide, so that their paper can sell it better.
Okay, good. And Gary, right here. There's the microphone.
Hi, Gary Waxmansky with Environmental Protection Agency. Two related points. I didn't hear in Brother Yosie's presentation, at least I don't think I heard it, the term certification. That is the possibility that out of the supply chain work you could actually populate countries like China with the ability to certify other smaller, preferably at the smaller, medium-sized level, the possibility of certifying other entities that could then develop, if you will, a market for the kind of, or enhance the demand for the kind of environmentally responsible behavior that I think we're all trying to undertake. And then this question about financing availability, we work with Treasury closely now, of course, under the Strategic Economic Dialogue, and I know that they have been starting to talk to financial organizations, probably mostly government, finance ministry related, about how to go about stimulating the availability of funding, probably at the subnational level, for environmentally responsible work, not necessarily small and medium enterprise, but just to make it easier for, and this goes back also to the certification question, to make it easier for a certifiably sustainable undertaking to get loans at a reasonable, not a discriminatory interest rate. So, and I guess the point there is that you've got Hank Paulson around for just, what, 5 or 6 more months. So, you know, if
kind of busy, I understand these days.
He'll have time on his hands next year, but it'll be in a different capacity. So the point here is that if there are insights that you people have about the problems to this facilitating of financing, it'd be useful soon, perhaps through Sister Turner, to try to bring those problems to the attention of the Treasury Department, and we'll be happy to help. Thank you. Whatever you want. Just don't get angry.
Let's see now. There were some questions in the middle of the.
Question about the certification and the financing.
Let me just take an initial stab at that. Certification plays a role in the kind of work that we do, but as I mentioned during the presentation, it's not the end game for us. The end game is be able to demonstrate specific, measurable performance results. Cost reductions is part of that, but sustainability performance result is really the primary end game for us. We're not an auditing certification body. We're not a body that is in the business of developing specific tools, technologies, or practices. What we do is apply those tools, technologies, and practices that are already available and have been developed by other bodies. So, for example, we have seen the instance where a number of global companies, I think the auto sector was the first to do this, but it's increasingly prevalent across many business sectors, where they have developed a business requirement that their tier 1 suppliers all become ISO 14001 certified. That is not universally the case within those global companies in all the areas where they operate. It started in North America, Europe with ISO 14000. It is gradually working its way across their supply chains in many other regions. And so our view on that is that whatever that global company's policy requirements are for its suppliers, that's a business decision between the company and its suppliers. So if there's a certification requirement or if there isn't, we're not the body that's going to impose that. On the other hand, we do have, as part of our projects, an ability to audit what in fact the results are. But when you talk about certification, Gary, I think you're referring to certification against a management standard per se. We're not a standard-setting body. I think the idea is intriguing, though, and I think this was implicit in your comment about what's the relationship then between certification and eligibility for certain financial assistance, loans, grants, whatever. And I do know that organizations like the Asian Development Bank have already begun to develop pools of capital for the purpose of building capacity to solve problems in the climate and water resources areas in countries like China and India. I think that's a very attractive way to match up what these supply chain projects are doing. And so part of the role we're trying to play is to see how do you leverage those, what are currently independent objectives, and how do you integrate them for purposes of performance improvement.
There is also the IFC is having someone write something for me on this. I'm not an expert on it yet. Maybe we've got Holly Lee if she's out there to talk about that. IFC is doing things, working with banks in China, and and I think this is a promising area, is working with banks on the whole concept of green credit. I mean, banks in China are supposedly, some of them are looking at the list that the Ministry of Environmental Protection has of blacklisted projects, and in theory they're not supposed to give them loans, and in theory some of these companies are not supposed to get their export permits. And this is a new area. And again, that's another pressure point. But I wonder sometimes, like what is the capacity of the banks to even develop their own green credit lending? That would be kind of an area that I think that maybe the U.S. SED type process could explore. And this kind of thing, maybe we'll have a green bank meeting down the road. We shall see.
Do it soon.
What?
Do it soon.
Do it soon. Okay.
I just wanted to add that one of our experiences, which wasn't in China but was in El Salvador, was working with the Ministry of Economy there, who was very proactive in working with small and medium enterprises, local SMEs, to help finance, and not just finance, but fund some of their green development, their sustainable development practices. They actually had funds to do this, and what we were doing with them was helping them market it, because a lot of the companies didn't know about this. A lot of them didn't have the capacity to do the application, and then there was the capacity on the back end of the ministry trying to review these applications and create an efficient process. So in some instances, there's funding and there's money and there's ability to finance, and there just isn't enough capacity to actually access it.
Okay, in the very back, I've got Jing right next to you, right behind you, and then the woman at the end. And then Ma Tianjie, could you give it to the man in the yellow shirt so we can go boom, boom, boom in just a second? All right.
Hi, Bo Xu from Chinese branch at Voice of America. And my question is for Mr. Ye. From your presentation, it seems like Chinese government, especially the central government, has realized the importance of sustainable development. Has the government made any specific policy to support sustainable SMEs or to support the green industries?
SMEs not in particular, but to supporting sustainable development, sustainable business, yes. Give you example. Well, if you look at the Chinese code on the construction industry, and there are many new codes for the energy efficiency, different new types of materials, building materials. That is all calling for sustainable business to grow as a market opportunity.
Any specific policies from the central government? Concrete policy?
I'm talking about the law, regulation, which is even higher than policy.
Oh, okay.
But I also think that you could look, if I can jump in here, that, I mean, even some of the laws like the renewable energy law and requiring certain, growing number of renewable energy sources, 10% by 2015, that in itself is starting to help to create a market and the pressure coming on local governments, and similarly the energy conservation law that it sounds kind of weird I'm saying I'm excited about this, that there's a provision in the law that says that governors of provinces will lose their job if they don't meet energy efficiency targets. I'm kind of excited. Is someone really going to lose their job? Mm-hmm. But the pressure of, honest to goodness, losing your job, to have some kind of leverage on these folks, is going to motivate some of these provincial officials, I think, into, we've got to build the capacity of our industries. And so in some ways, it's kind of, there's a market being creative for folks that you're working with to be, there are some ESCOs in China, the energy efficiency service companies that the World Bank has helped support. But the need is really great, and so I think the law is starting to put pressure to create some of the market. But the challenge is, which I think that Mr. Ye talked about, is that the actual capacity of these companies to do that. I mean, I know that there are a lot of U.S. companies kind of drooling over the possibility of going in and breaking into. And I wonder if you could say anything about that, because I think it's kind of hard for international small and medium enterprises to
get into the business.
To get into the business in China.
They're already in.
But I mean, how big? I mean, lots.
Lots. Okay.
What are the challenges of them?
Large one. I'll give you large ones. The largest Chinese building energy efficiency company in China is a U.S. company, big one.
Who's that?
Johnson Control.
So the market's there for international companies?
It's for international, but
okay.
For new buildings, yeah, and also retrofitted buildings.
Okay, and the woman at the very end had a question.
Hi, my name's Sarah Metz from St. Mary's College, Maryland. I was wondering what you feel is the general trend on the state, multinational, and private level concerning interest and implementation of green practices, and in the past 5 or 10 years, how do you feel organizations such as your own or just regular customer public awareness has affected this?
Who wants to go first?
Go ahead. Yes, sir.
Are you speaking specifically about China's? Okay. Well, I think progress always has to begin with awareness. And I think there's a growing level of awareness about these green practices, not only in China, but in many other emerging markets. I think that's the result of a number of factors. I think there's pressure, obviously, upon global companies to exhibit these practices more in their operations. I actually think the Olympics will certainly promote awareness of these developments, not only during the games themselves, but afterwards. And I think whether it's Johnson Controls, which I'm pleased to say is a member of the World Environment Center, and other companies, there's money in them hills increasingly. I visited the offices of the Natural Resources Defense Council, which, as you know, is an American-based NGO. But when I was in Beijing in May, I visited with NRDC. And they have been increasingly active in energy efficiency in the building sector and have developed quite a lot of expertise in advising Chinese organizations as well as Western companies in terms of green building practices. And I think if you talk to an NRDC of the world, their view is increasingly optimistic that they can make a difference. And I think if you talk to the World Resources Institute, if you talk to Greenpeace, if you talk to the World Wildlife Fund, if you talk to the Nature Conservancy, you talk to us, I think we're all increasingly of the belief that there is so much change going on that we can, if we find the right leverage, if we couple that with the right policy instruments, the right economic incentives, that we can make that positive change happen. Now, we all have to confront certain shorter-term realities about the need for electricity generation, about the need for availability of fuel. So I'm not saying that things are going to get dramatically better in the short run when stacked up against these big global trends. In order to be in this business, you have to be an optimist. Otherwise, you would be seriously depressed.
Give you 2 examples. One is not a good one. You're talking about the green practices, right? From the give you a good one. But the retail, it's probably in May 1st. Just past May 1st, the Chinese central government had ordered that shut down all the plastic bags in any sales, retail sales. It was broadcasted several months before this, and no one believed it. Because, for example, I smoke pipe. Last month, the Beijing municipal government said all the restaurants could not, in all the public areas, cannot smoke free. And right now, if you go to really big, fancy, good restaurants, which become true, otherwise it's still there. However, this plastic bag things are real. It shut down, actually died over 2,000 small businesses, which are in the PE, PV, doing the plastic bag business. At the same time, it promoted the degradable organic material-based bags, and so it's there. And also give you example is the green practices. From the employment point of view, it's really bad because there's no one that can replace it. No industry or new things can replace it. It's all given to the multinational take advantage. This year, the Chinese government announced, which is so far announced in year 2008, they will shut down 1,060 cement factories. Right now, it's already over 700 cement factories are shut down. They are all SMEs, unfortunately. And what he take advantage of the large ones, including multinational ones. But there's no replace how the clean cement industry growing up, not there yet.
Just in addition to that, I mentioned earlier that the Chinese government is forecasting a shortage of electricity generation this year. One of the reasons why that's happening is that the Chinese government has been shutting down coal mines that are particularly dirty and not well managed and are polluting the landscape. And so to solve one problem, you may be creating another. And so it's the need to look at that as an integrated process that I think becomes increasingly important.
Okay, the gentleman here in the yellow shirt, and Jing Chung, can you bring the mic to Lyndon? We have a couple questions that have been emailed in a second. Okay. The Matiente, the gentleman in the yellow shirt, and then the woman there.
Great, thank you.
Good morning. My name is Patrick Mannion. I'm a teacher's assistant with an environmental policy program at Georgetown University, and my question is for New Ventures. Given the short lifespan and lack of government funding for sustainable SMEs that you mentioned, do you find that there's enough of a market for a sustainable SME to flourish past the initial high cost of a startup compared to the relatively low cost of SMEs starting up non-sustainably? Basically, are the economic benefits of a sustainable development for SMEs realized quickly enough for them to flourish past the 2.5-year lifespan that you mentioned, and how do the lifespans of sustainable SMEs compare to non-sustainable SMEs, the averages across?
Very good question. Hard. Right now, I think the challenge is that for sustainable SMEs, they have a much bigger challenge in comparison with the conventional SMEs. And because the opportunity cost is high, and their technology, actually also I call for help that the technology transfer is also required from developed countries to come to China for the sustainable development. We need variety of new technologies. Biomass example, we need new types of boilers which can work more efficiently, because if you burn the biomass, you're talking about a totally different technology versus conventional coal burn boilers. But saying that, what do you call that? The fatality rate for sustainable SMEs are higher than conventional.
But on the question though, as far as your role for the technology, do you also try to play matchmaker? I mean, potentially bringing like a U.S. SME in partnership? Is that a model that you could consider doing or could consider?
Wonderful question. We wish, because I saw several times that I saw the U.S. SMEs in the energy sectors. They have so many wonderful technologies. It's also maybe in the pipelines. But one thing is, as everybody knows, the intellectual property issues is always in China. And the second issue that related to the Chinese SMEs is technology transfer requires big chunk of money. SMEs is too small to support. However, I would love to see that SMEs supporting SMEs from the U.S. to China in the sustainable development domains.
Well, we need to ponder how to help facilitate that.
You can do that?
Well, not me, but I'm saying that there are people in the network. I mean, you have.
Sure.
I mean, you have your AmCham, American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai is the only AmCham in China that has its own like corporate sustainable development. CSR office.
Yeah, they're in the CSR and are very active.
But I think that. And then U.S.-China Business Council, an NGO that also works to try to help U.S. companies get to China. There may be other. I think that in some ways, New Ventures, may need to branch out to try to find partners in those types of business organizations. And you also met the World Environment Council people to hang with. Senator, sorry.
If I don't know if the U.S. become a part of the global deal in the climate change, you would all of a sudden find there's so many good technologies available in U.S. in the energy conservation, renewable energy, all kind.
Yeah. Okay, Lyndon, you have a couple emailed questions.
I just have one, actually, and it follows that question so smoothly. It's really nice. This is from Alex McIntosh from Nestle, Director of Corporate Citizenship at Nestle. And his question was partially answered in the last one. Do you see opportunities for sustainable SMEs based outside of China but wanting to bring technical business strategic skills to address Chinese problems, which I guess you said was yes. And what are the challenges that they need to overcome, such as cultural, political, and business barriers?
Partnership for SMEs, especially U.S. SME, because they're small, they better find partnership inside of China.
But do you guys help bring these partnerships together too, right?
I think there's likely to be a progression of instruments here that will bring together the various parties. Clearly, working through the marketplace is going to be the fastest means by which you match up different SMEs or global companies with SMEs. But I think over time, what will naturally occur, and we see this evolving in places like China, is that there is going to be a role for policy instruments. There is going to be a role for regulatory processes, because the marketplace, while it's amazingly effective in disseminating technologies and information, combine that with the internet, nevertheless, not everybody's going to want to play by the same rules. And so ultimately, over time, I would think governments, whether the issue is climate change on a global scale or water quality on a local scale in some Chinese city, I think eventually public pressures, and we see this happening already in China. In fact, the Chinese ambassador to the U.S. addressed this issue when he appeared before a World Environment Center forum here at the Press Club in March, where he particularly called attention to the fact that you have increasingly grassroots pressures in China to advocate clear policies and their implementation. So I think there's likely to be a natural evolution and complementarity over time between what the marketplace can do, what government needs to do, and I think there are going to be a lot of spaces in between there for groups like the World Resources Institute, the World Environment Centers to operate in order to collaborate on solving particular problems. Neither one of our kinds of organizations are ever going to be big enough, nor in my view do I think a WEC ever should get too big, because then we'll diminish our effectiveness. So we've got to be clear, we've got to be focused, just like a lot of other activities, in order to generate progress.
I just want to add something about the flip side of the technology transfer and bringing in companies from outside China. One of the suppliers that we visited in Shanghai, one of SGM's suppliers, had saved up money for a cleaner machine that did, I think it was sand washing. And they had eventually saved up enough money to buy one of these machines from Germany. And then they ironically found out that the exact same machine or type of machine was being built in China in their manufacturing neighborhood for less than half the price. So sometimes it's not looking outside that you need to do.
Okay, we're going to go first over here, the woman here, and then in the back, and then we'll ping pong back and forth. So you're next, and then the gentleman in the back.
Una Costa from Environmental Defense. Could you comment on the likely outcome or implications from the agreement that Paulson had with Vice Premier from China when they met in Annapolis late June? They basically made an agreement that China and the U.S. need to cooperate more and better in terms of sharing information, sharing technology, in terms of getting better at improving our environment and also on energy use as well, being less, I guess, more independent from the foreign oil that we rely on.
You're talking about Wang Qishan, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, Wang Qishan's delegation to here, right? 2 weeks ago. Okay.
And he also had a great article in the FT regarding steps on what we need to do to forge a better relationship between China and U.S. to kind of open up the floodgate in terms of having technology transfer and also working better on environmental objectives.
In the large firms, international multinational firms, for example, GE, they are basically now marketing themselves in China as a green company. Doing wind power, water project, everything. You no longer see them as regular GE. It's become green GE. But you're talking about SMEs, U.S. SMEs to work at that level. I hope, right now I wish, but I really hope that there's some kind of policy can support, because I know as a fact there are so many good technologies here, good, and also maybe some good part in China can be transferred to supporting each other.
We don't take, as the World Environment Center, we don't interact necessarily with governments on their policy commitments, but let me mention one of the kind of activity that we do undertake that I think at least complements and can help accelerate some of the developments you were calling attention to. And I did not address this in my presentation for purposes of time, but I think it's relevant to bring it up here. We typically, in the course of a year, will organize 4 to 6 major global roundtables on particular topics that are of interest to our members and their stakeholders. So, for example, we have been working increasingly closely with the Chinese embassy in here, the Ministry of Environment in China, and DRC in China, and other organizations. And so in November, we're planning a 2-day meeting in Beijing specifically on the topic of improving energy efficiency in the Chinese private sector. Energy efficiency has been part of the strategic economic dialogue, but apart from that process per se, we have carved out an increasing role for ourselves to bring together people at the policy level, but also the senior business level, and we'll invite some of the NGOs into this discussion to talk very specifically about what are the kinds of business strategies and opportunities that can exist and be implemented to accelerate the process of improving energy efficiency in the Chinese sector. That has very direct economic implications in China. It has very direct environmental benefits in a country like China. There are market opportunities. General Electric, good example, but people are going to be making more energy efficient cars in China and a whole raft. So what are the range of business sectors that can look increasingly at opportunities in energy efficiency? And so that's another one of the activities that we're going to be focusing on, not because of the strategic economic dialogue, but I think some of the participants in that dialogue would have a natural interest in this kind of activity.
Okay, the gentleman in the back.
Hi, Sean Spears from the World Watch Institute. I was actually going to ask you about how, as a nonprofit, you're getting your financial backing, but it was more to the point of actually getting towards why not expansion, and I was surprised several questions previously that you're saying you're really not too interested in becoming too large, and I'm wondering why, because it's no longer a question of the fact that we need to make changes, but how quickly we need to make them. And it seems like, for nonprofits, they're able to help companies that don't have the finances to do it internally, and yet, there's no hybrid in between of trying to expand within the nonprofit. So I'm just wondering why you don't think it's a reasonable thing to do.
First of all, let me answer the question how we get our funding. 3 ways. One is companies that are members of the World Environment Center, all of which are listed on our public website, pay a membership fee every year. So that's one source of revenue. Secondly, because we are a nonprofit, non-advocacy organization, we do periodically get funding from various government agencies. Those have ranged from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, Department of Energy, U.S. Agency for International Development. We also get funding from some foundations. So it would be the combination of those 3 that provides the pool of our resources. The membership fee would support things like our staff salaries and office space, all that, but then there's specific project revenue for the things we do in China and things of that nature. So that's the source of the funding. In terms of why not grow a lot faster and bigger, I'm not saying we're ruling that out. I'm saying that we want to proceed in what we think is going to be a pretty extended process here, time-wise. We want to proceed in a very focused and careful manner. I have had a lot of experience with trade associations, both in the U.S. but also globally. And one of the things I've seen is that when organizations become so big, they become very bureaucratic. and there's a tendency sometimes for a lower common denominator to prevail. I think what we're trying to do is to really say, where can we make a difference? And how can we create capacity in other organizations to make a difference? Because all of the information and technical skills and knowledge that we're able to work through specific projects or roundtables or other things we do really is a form of empowerment to other kinds of people. So we want to punch above our weight, in other words. And I don't look upon whether we're 46 companies or 70 or 200 as the ultimate measure of effectiveness. And so I think we will grow. In fact, we've been having more and more interest on the part of companies join us. And I think we'll go through that in a methodical process. But I think we're more interested in seeing how we can strategically leverage what we do well to address specific needs, and in the process form partnerships, some of which we have with some of the organizations in this room, to really have a bigger impact globally. So I think it's just a part of an ongoing thought process that's aimed at creating value, both business value but also societal value, and to doing that in a thoughtful way so we don't end up having to manage our own bureaucracy and get caught up in the internal dynamics of all of that.
Additionally, our mission is really best suited to customizing solutions for our members, and so we don't have a cookie cutter, and we're not really made to kind of dish out our solutions. We work with our members on each basis we create a customized solution. But I just also want to say, Sean, that the part of the issue is not that we don't want the solutions to spread and get larger. You know, that's actually one of our Greening the Supply Chain project is we want to work ourselves out of that in a sense. We want that to continue without us. We definitely want the solutions to spread, but we want to make sure that, as Terry said, we're managing our projects and our business within our mission.
And actually, I want to put maybe a final comment to you to build on what she just said in terms of new ventures, because I mean, you guys are still relatively small in China, but is there things that new ventures that you're in your thinking and what you're doing that will, you know, to kind of to leave some, you know, that you can't do it all by yourself? Are you building the capacity of other organizations that could do what you do, or, you know, WRI can't be doing this forever in China, right? You know what?
Do you want to answer?
Ray, why don't you answer that, Ray? Can we give a mic to Ray? And Ray's going to close us out because unfortunately we're running out of time. But the speakers they're having lunch with me afterwards, so some of you can come tackle them and ask them, gently tackle them and ask them questions.
As some of you may know, WR is actually expanding a presence in China, and we're actually going to be opening an office in China. So we're developing our strategy right now, but I would like to see the role of WR is not to be another international environmental group in China, but to help build capacity in institutions for China and Chinese institutions. So I think with new ventures, we're in a process of kind of reformulating a strategy, and we just like to support Weijia and his ideas of how we can institutionalize. So we're building an institution via new ventures around SME development, also green supply chain, and a whole suite of activities. So I think the focus perhaps maybe the lesson for international groups when we go to China and we work with China is to partner, as Terry mentioned, but also to help build capacity of the Chinese institutions. At the end of the day, it's the Chinese institutions, the Chinese people are going to have to solve the problems. And we as a role can be as a partner, and also we can learn from them as well. So that's what I like to see. So hopefully we'll achieve that.
And that is a great note to close us out. And yeah, again, I mean, I fancy that, again, WRI is expanding. And we're probably going to have more WRI kiddies coming on through here at the China Environment Forum because they've got a lot of different branches. So stay tuned. Thank you very much, everyone. Just to let you know that next week on Thursday the 17th, 9 a.m., scones, coffee, and another China Environment Forum meeting, this time focused on yours, mine, ours, about, you know, China's carbon emissions. It's not just China's. Thank you very much.